In this video, we will show you how to replace your front brakes, pads, and rotors on this Ford F-150. This will be located behind your front wheels. Let's get into it. Okay friend, let's get started on our job. The first thing you need to do is safely raise and support the front of the vehicle so your front wheel's off the ground. Continuing on from there, we're going to remove all 6 of our 21mm lug nuts and then the wheel. Continuing from here, we're going to have to push back our caliper pistons at least enough that we can remove the caliper from the bracket and the brake pads. To do that, I'm going to use a small pry bar and make my way right inside this area of the caliper. There's 2 ports. We'll gently make our way up against the brake rotor, and we'll start prying the caliper away. Once we have a little bit of movement from the rotor, we can continue on. There's one. Now let's remove our 2 caliper slider pin mounting bolts. Those are all on the back side of the caliper, and you'll be using a 13mm for each of these. Now let's start removing the caliper from the bracket. We're going to be using our small pry bar if necessary here. For this, typically you can make your way in between, gently start prying it away. Now once you have your caliper removed, the next thing you need to do is give a quick inspection along the 2 caliper pistons and their corresponding boots. If you see any fluid, that's brake fluid, and that means you have to replace the caliper. For now, what we're going to do is carefully push in each of these 2 pistons at the same time. You need to push them in at the same time because if you press one in, the other one will want to protrude out, and you don't want that to happen. We'll hang this aside temporarily, putting no pressure on the flex hose, and grab our tool. Now to push back the 2 pistons, I'm using a dual piston caliper compressor here. You can also use the single type, but if you do so, you want to make sure you use something up against both those pistons at the same time so you can push them both in. Let's try to get this in here. Be a tight fit at first. Okay. Once you have both those pushed in, one last quick inspection for any fluid or damage in this area. This caliper looks fine. We'll put it aside with no pressure on the flex hose. Continuing on, we'll remove the brake pads from the area. If your brake pads are stuck in place like ours are, we can continue on lightly tapping them out of position. There's those brake pads. Now we'll remove the caliper bracket from the area. This is held in place with 2 21mm headed mounting bolts along the backside there. Go ahead and remove the first bolt, a quick inspection, and start it back in just a couple threads. Quick inspection of that caliper bracket. We will be dealing with this on the bench, but first let's go ahead and remove our brake rotor. When removing the rotor, it's common you're going to have to tap on it to remove it. If you do have to hit it with a hammer for any reason, you want to make sure you have something holding it in place so it cannot fall off and potentially hurt you. I'm just starting on a lug nut here. Now we'll tap on this with a hammer so we can remove it. There it is, friend. Now before we install any of our brand new parts, we need to do a little bit of cleaning here. We're going to start with the hub mating surface. This is the wheel bearing here, and this is the hub where the bearing will sit up against. As you can tell, there's a lot of rust and buildup on this. We want to try to clean it down so we have a smooth mating surface. You can use a sanding disc for this or a wire brush, whatever works best for you. Now that I've cleaned as much as I can with a sanding disc, I'm going to use a wire brush in between the areas of the studs and the hub itself. After you've completed cleaning, continue on with some anti-seize on the mating surface. Okay, let's prepare our brand new rotor for installation. Before you install this on the vehicle, you want to make sure you clean both of the braking surfaces. You have the outer surface and along the backside, the inner surface. Some parts cleaner and a clean rag will do well for this. Double check, make sure there's no oil on there. Let's get this on the vehicle. Once you have your brake rotor in place, continue on with one of your original lug nuts. We'll just go ahead and put this on here, bottom it out, preventing this rotor from falling off and potentially hurting us while we continue on. Now let's pay attention to our caliper bracket. Let's go ahead and disassemble it. We'll start with our slider pins. For each of these, you should be able to take hold of them, give them a little spin, and pull them away from the caliper bracket. A quick inspection, you will want to clean these. You can use a wire brush or even some sandpaper. Make sure they're not rotted, weak, or damaged in any way. Continuing on, once you have your slider pin out of there, you want to go ahead and pay close attention to the slider pin boot. We want to make sure it's not torn, worn, or damaged in any way. Typically for that, you can go ahead and take hold of it, slide it right off that caliper bracket. Once again, a quick inspection of that. We'll have to clean this up, set it aside. Repeat the process on the other side of the caliper bracket here. Now we'll remove our brake pad caliper bracket tins. You'll find that you have 4 of these, 1 on each corner. Typically for them, you can just pry them right out of place, dispose of those properly. Now we can start cleaning this up. I'm going to be using a wire brush. You can use some sandpaper or even a sanding disc. We'll be cleaning each of those 4 areas that we just removed the tins from. Now I've cleaned all 4 of those areas. We're going to continue on with each one of our 2 caliper slider pin ports next. For these, we'll just use some parts cleaner and a bore brush directly inside here, cleaning it out as much as possible. After that, we'll do the same to the other side and start reinstalling. A quick rinse, a close inspection. Once you've cleaned the inside, pay attention along this part right here. There's a small groove where your boot should sit. You want to make sure that's clean and free of any miscellaneous debris as well. You can use a wire brush or some sandpaper, whatever you need to. One last rinse. All right, that one looks good. Go ahead and repeat the process on the opposite side. Continuing on, I'm using some high temperature caliper lubricant on each one of those 4 areas on the bracket that we had removed the tins. Now we'll install our brand new caliper bracket tins. For these, you want to start with the inner portion, press that in, and then roll the outer portion in, locking it into position. You can use some pliers if necessary. Double check this one. Now let's go ahead and clean up our caliper slider boots. For this, I'm just going to use a rag. We'll give it a couple twists and slide it right on through the center of each one of the boots. After you have it pulled through, just go ahead and roll that slider pin boot around. We're trying to remove any of the miscellaneous grease or debris from inside of the boot as possible here. Get as much as possible out of there. Once you have it clean, just another quick inspection. Make sure it's soft and pliable, not torn, worn, or damaged. Go ahead and repeat the process for the other one. We're going to use some high temperature lubricant where the slider pin needs to go. We'll go inside the port and along the outer cusp there. Now we can get the slider boot in place. We'll just press it right on. It should fit into the groove. Quick twist, a light tug, make sure that's properly secured in place. Moving along from the boot, we're going to use that high temperature lubricant right on that caliper slider pin now. We'll lubricate the entire shaft and then all the way up in the groove closest to my fingers. Continuing on, we can take that slider pin and we'll press it right into position here, sliding it into the port, squeezing out any air from inside the boot. We'll just give this a couple quick spins, making sure everything's properly lubricated and secured. Repeat the process on the other side of the bracket. All right, let's get this over to the vehicle. Start getting this caliper bracket in place. We have our 2 mounting bolts. I clean the threads and I'm using some blue thread locker. Go ahead and start each of these mounting bolts in. Once they're bolts started, you can snug them up. The torque for them is 184 foot-pounds. Now it's time to install our brand new brake pads. When you're looking at your kit, you're going to find that you have 2 brake pads that have the raised areas for the brake pistons, which are part of the caliper, and then the other pad, the outer pad, should not have those raised areas. So we'll have 1 pad with and 1 pad without. The pad with the raised areas is going to be the inboard pad. Slide this into the corresponding slots on the bracket. Press it in. You should not have to hammer these in using a tool of any sort. If you can't press them in, more than likely the bracket isn't cleaned properly. Before we install the caliper, we're going to use high temperature lubricant on each one of our 2 caliper pistons and along the back side of each of the 3 ears on the outboard portion of the caliper. This will help with vibration dampening and noise reduction overall. Now we can get this caliper in place, sliding it over the brake pads and aligning it with the caliper slider pins. I've cleaned the threads on each one of my 2 mounting bolts for this. We'll just go ahead and start those in, snug them up. The torque for these is 27 foot-pounds. Now that we have everything together and torqued, we can go ahead and remove our lug nut. One last quick inspection in this area, we'll reinstall our wheel. Now with the wheel safely back down on the ground, we're going to torque each one of our lug nuts to 150 foot-pounds in a crisscross manner. Torqued.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.